In this video, I want to show you how to create content for the paper mapping that I created in Cinema 4D. If you haven't seen the other video, I recommend you checking out that first. What we did there was creating this three-dimensional paper structure and then mapping it with Resolume. And in this video, we're gonna have a look at how to create some content for it. All of these project files are included in the preset pack that I made that is available on my web store. So if you get the template for the paper mapping, you will also get all of the project files as well as the content ready to play inside of Resolume. Now, before we head into Cinema, I want to export my input map from Resolume as an SVG file. So in here, I have all of my slices. For the Blender tutorial, I created this full slice for reference. I don't need this for this one, so ignore that if you don't know what I'm talking about. So here I have all of my slices of the input map. And if I go up here to the mapping, I can set export to SVG and then export this into my assets folder. And so here it will create an input and an output file for the SVG. I don't need the output, you can delete that, and I will rename the input to Inputmap. Now I can close Resolume, and we don't want to import this directly into Cinema, because if you import it as an SVG, it will create this like vector file from it, which is a little bit tricky to work with. What you do want to do is to take it into Illustrator, and you want to save it as a super old version of Illustrator, like Illustrator 8. And then when you import that into Cinema, it will import it as splines, and then it will be way easier to work with. So yeah, I know it's a little bit weird of a workaround, but this is just from my experience, this works best. So I'll just open up Illustrator, take this in here, just save it once as an Illustrator file, and set this to Illustrator 8. Because for some reason the old Illustrator files just import better into Cinema. And now I can finally open up Cinema and import this pixel map. So now I have Cinema open, I can import my Illustrator file into here. So if I open this up now, you can see that all of my slices are individual objects and individual splines. So this is a great starting point to work with. And what's really neat is that it's inside of a null, and this null has actually a perfect center point in the middle. So I can just reset this transformation here to 0 and 0. And this way it will be perfectly centered, which is just much easier for us to work with. And now we can also create a camera. And with the new version, it actually creates a redshift camera as a standard. And I don't want to work with redshift, I want to work with the standard render. So what I'm going to do is to jump into the render settings, change the render to standard, and also while we're here we can already change all of the output settings, because we are going to work with the width of the input map that you have. So depending on the input map that you created in Resolume, you want to set the correct values here. For the template that I created, it's 684 by 1080, and then the frame rate you want to set to 30 if it's not at 30, and the frame range you just want to set to all frames. And actually I'd also want to increase that to 300 frames, so we have a nice 10 seconds loop. And let's also define the output path right away. In the save settings right here, I will go into the folder that I want to save them in, to the render folder right here, and click save. And what I want to do here is actually, I always love working with these tokens in Cinema, where you can actually define the camera name, for example, or the scene name, or different parameters that can change. And so this way you can automatically rename the folders and the file names of the renderings, which saves you some time, and it can also help you from accidentally overwriting some old files. So either you can set this to something like the current minute or something like that, so you will never have any overrides, What I like to do is to create a camera like this. Be sure to leave that slash in there. And so if I just copy this and paste it again, I will now have a folder that is named like my camera, and the files will also be named as my camera. And this way, if I change my camera name in Cinema and then render a new version, it will always just automatically create a new folder and new file names for this rendering. And that's kind of a workflow that I just like working with. As a format, I'm going to choose PNG sequence, and I'm also going to render it with an alpha channel. And we can also select 16 bits. So I'm going to close this. I think we're good here. And now we can get into our camera settings. So I am going to create a new camera right here, go into the camera view, and then zero out all the values right here. And I'm going to go back on my z-axis to match the outlines. What I also want to do is the standard focal length is set to 35. I want to change this to a longer lens, something like the portrait, just so we have like a more narrow field of view. Since we're not really working with like a perspective mapping in the sense of like rendering from a sweet spot, but we're rendering onto like a sort of UV map representation of our 3D object, it doesn't make too much sense to work with a perspective camera. We still want to keep the perspective, because if we would change this to a parallel perspective, we would lose a lot of the depth that is created because of the perspective camera. So like I think the best sweet spot for this is to use a long focal length, which allows you to have less of these very strong perspective effects, but still create some of those like difference in movement and shadows. And this might sound a little abstract and complex right now, but it will make sense later. As you can see here, I am aligned pretty well. And once I have this matched to the frame, I can lock my camera by right-clicking it, going to the rigging tags and add a protection tag. And that ensures that I can't move my camera anymore. And now I can start creating some Mograph effects. So first I want to extrude our objects. And to do that, I can go to the extrude tool here and then selecting all of the individual objects, dragging them out of this null right here. I'll delete the null that we had, and for the extrude, I'm also going to the object settings and check on this hierarchical tool here, and I can change the offset now to I'll just do 0 for now, but you can have them have some depth. What you do want to do, they have, for some reason, they have different directions. So what you want to do is to set the direction onto the z-axis, and this way I can extrude them to the back. So if I jump out of my camera view here, you can now see that this is actually extruding it into the back. I just want to have some very slight extrusion like this, and that looks about right, and I like that. I'm happy with that. And now that I have them extruded, I want to create a individual extruded objects from all of these splines. So I'm just going to right-click this, go to current state to object, and this is going to create a new null with another null inside, and inside of there I have all of my individual elements, which is great. So for now, the extrude right here, I'm going to keep that. I'm just going to disable it and hide it in the viewport and the render. And drag it down. This other one right here, I am gonna drag all of my objects outside of my nulls and delete those nulls. And now what we can do is we can drag all of those into a Mograph fracture. And this way we can start creating some Mograph effects onto those objects. So drag them into the fracture right here. We can close this down, and now we can create Mograph effects like something like a shader effector, for example. So an effector and shader. And right out of the box, this creates some scaling, which we don't want right now. What I'm gonna do is to rotate them. As you can see now, we can start rotating them along one axis. I'm gonna go for this one right here and set this to something like 360. And we don't have much going on right now because we don't have a shader yet. So we are gonna go inside of the shading options and create a new shader here. Just select this drop-down menu to create a new noise shader. And now you can already see that we have a noise that is now affecting the rotation of all of our objects. Now I'm going to go inside of this noise to start animating it. So for the animation speed, I'm going to set that to 1. And the loop period, I'm going to set to 10. So this is in seconds. That means once I reach 10 seconds right here, it should loop. And this happened since the 2024 version. I don't exactly know what's going on, why it's not animating right out of the box, but I know that you have to go into the parameter panel right here. And if I set the time offset to 1 frame, now it works. So don't know exactly what this is and why it's happening, but this seems to be, at least for me, the fix. Now you can see that all of these slices are animating according to our noise. And now it's just a matter of playing around with, different noise types and different animation settings. So one of the cool things about Cinema is that you have all of these different noise types, which is really cool to play around with. And then you can also play with like the scaling to make it more of a global thing, or smaller to have it be more individual and more on a smaller scale of affecting the clones. So for now, I'm just gonna leave it at 100. It was quite nice. I think I'm actually quite happy with this already. Again, play around with all of these values. You can have a lot of fun with this stuff. To actually render this, I wanna add a light source. So I'm just gonna add a point light right here. Just drag this out on this Z axis a little bit so we can actually see it. If I hit render with Command R, I can see my render view. What I don't have yet are shadows, so I want to go inside of the settings for the light into general and add a shadow map soft. And this should actually create some shadows. I don't know why it's not creating them for me. Let me just check. I guess we do have shadows, they're just not very strong. So let me just check what kind of scale we're working at here. All right, yeah, we are very, very tiny. So what we want to do is to scale all of this up. So what I want to do is I'm going to move this cube just for reference, because I know this is 2 meters. Actually, I'm going to select my fracture object right here and then set the scaling to ×10. And the camera, we're also going to multiply ×10, but I will need to remove my protection tag for that. I'm just going to move it onto a different object for now. So go into my camera, set it to ×10, and move the protection tag back onto the camera. So now our shadows should look somewhat better. And yeah, this is already looking way better than before. So yeah, the correct scaling definitely matters for something like shadows, So to make those shadows even better, I can head into the shadow setting right here of the light, and I can increase the resolution of my shadow map. So from 250, I'm gonna set that up to the maximum, 2000. And now you can see that the shadows look way better already. Other than that, maybe I'll just move it a bit further away, the light, just to have a more homogenic spread of the light. And I think this looks quite nice already. So yeah, I think I'm happy with this one. So now to render it, I can rename my camera to set the naming for the file. So I'm just gonna set it to something like slice rotation. And now if I click render to picture viewer, this will render out my image sequence. And you can see that the name of the folder is slice rotation. And if I show this in my Finder, I can see the folder and the file names are slice rotation. So again, I just like using these kind of naming tokens instead of just going into the render settings every time. So what I would do often is, like, when I create variations, just create a second camera and then like call this something else and just switch to this one for rendering another variation of this. And you can also do that with takes. So if you go into the render settings and then name them by the current take, this is also a neat way to like have a nice pipeline of doing different takes, then automatically naming all of the file names by their take name. So you can just add them to the render queue and render a bunch of files without worrying about overriding anything. So this is one technique. Now you can take this image sequence, take it into After Effects. I'm just gonna save my file quickly, name it slice rotation. Yeah, so this is one possible technique of creating some content for this setup. And I think you can now imagine like where this can go and what kind of possibilities you have with this. So, you know, you can like start animating the light source, having some animations of the shadows, or also starting to animate the extrusion or the position of the cubes. So maybe instead of like animating the rotation with this shader, we might want to extrude our cubes in like the Z depth and then have the shader like instead of the rotation here affect the Z position. And if all of the objects were thicker like this, you could you know, have some effect like this. So as you can see, you just have like a whole lot of possibilities now to work with these individual slices as your cloners, basically, to have them be affected by any of the Cinema Mograph setups. So another version to do this that I want to show you is not to take the slices outside of Resolume, but because I worked on a perfect grid for my template, I can actually just create a regular cloner of cubes that will perfectly fit into my input map right here. And so because I know that the template that I work with is 30 cubes in height and 19 cubes in the width, basically, I can just recreate this and then do similar techniques on that setup. So let's just do that. I'm just going to create a new file, and I will start by creating a cube. I will set this cube to 1 meter, so 100 centimeters. And then I will create a cloner. I will drag the cubes into my cloner. And the grid is fine. I just don't need any depth, so I'm going to set the first count. So I'm going to set the first count value to 1. And then the other ones, I'm going to set this to 30 and the third input to 19. And then I want to change the distance to 100 and 100, so they are all directly aligned. And now you can see that I have the same aspect ratio as before. I actually want to go back into the render settings because I created a new project. All of this has reset, so I want to set this back to standard. Go into the output settings, set my resolution to 684 by 1080. Set my range to all frames to 300 300 down here. Actually set this to all frames like this. And then save as a PNG inside of my renders folder. And again, I'm gonna create this camera tag with an alpha channel. So that's the render settings. I will also create a new camera, reset the X and Y position, reset the rotation. I guess I worked with a wrong rotation right here. Let me just reset everything here, and I'm gonna change that in my cloner settings. So this is the one that's actually 19 and the Z is 1. So I'm gonna jump into my camera, go back. I also set this to 100. Sorry, that was a bit messy right now. I hope you followed that. Basically, I just set my cloner to the correct axis. So this is X, Y, and Z axis. So the X is 19, Y is 30, and the Z axis is 1. And then we have a distance of 100 centimeter per step. And now I can move my camera back just to match my frame as good as possible. And also I need to change my focal length again to something longer. I'm gonna set it to 80 again. So move back even further with my camera. So now I have this set up, I can start adding some Mograph effects again. So once again, I'm gonna create a shader. Go into the shading options, click on this drop-down menu to create a noise. Go inside of this noise and set the animation speed to 1 and the loop period to 10. Then I'm gonna go back to the shader, the parameter, time offset to 1 frame, because for some reason only that activates the animation. And instead of the scale, I want to affect the Z position of my cubes. And I also just realized that I just created the shader without having the cloner selected. If you create the effectors while having your cloner selected, it will automatically apply them. If not, then you will have to apply them manually by selecting the cloner, going into the effectors tab, and then dragging your effector into the space right here. So now I can go back to my shader to play around with the shading settings. I can already see that it kind of moved all of the objects back by quite a bit. And I might not want them to go back, but actually forward. So I'm gonna change the position here to something negative, like -500 maybe. Something like this looks good. If I start animating this, it looks nice, but I can see that I'm quite far off from my frame. So I might want to increase the contrast inside of my noise shading. And yeah, this way I can see how it affects the positioning. So I can play around with these values here, just to have most of them be kind of aligned with my input map, and some of them can move out. It's just gonna look a little bit messy if everything just comes out, because it won't have any coherence with our original shape. Well, this is actually quite interesting already, so I'm quite happy with this, and I'm gonna leave it that way. I'm just gonna create a new light, turn on the shadows again, set the shadow map to a high resolution, and bring it back a bit just to have it throw some shadows. The closer it gets, obviously, the longer the shadows will be. So yeah, it's both interesting. Might also want to turn on the ambient occlusion for this one. If we go into the render settings, into the effects, ambient occlusion, and if we have a look at that, let's turn off the light and see what effect it has. I think that's That's quite neat. I also think that the shader is actually affecting the colors. So if I go into the shader settings here and go to the parameter, if you see the color mode right here, you can set that to off, and now they will all stay white. Yeah, this is what was kind of changing the colors, and I was thinking like, it's weird how the colors behave with the light, but now it makes sense. So just turn off the color settings right here, and you won't be affecting the color of the material with the shader. And for these mapping things, I often just work with the standard material, which is basically like a gray-white. But of course, you can just create any material right here by opening this material menu, double-clicking, and then creating a new material and dragging this onto your cloner. Now, this will get a bit more lighter. Let's just leave that here so we have more control. But for projection, you know, I like to work with white. I can still change it all in Resolume, but white is just the strongest contrast that you have with projectors, especially with smaller ones. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Now, I'm quite happy with this, and I'm gonna render this out, call it something like Z position, and just check my render settings again. Yeah, this is set to camera, so that's fine. Just gonna save it before I start the render process. And I'm gonna render it out. Now, while this is rendering, I can show you some variations that you could use for this. So, you know, these cubes you can also just change in terms of its properties. So if I just make this an object by pressing C, and I'll just hide the cloner for a second, so I just have one of my cubes right here. I can go into the face mode, select the back face right here, and drag that out. And now if I activate my cloner again, you can see that this way we have a completely different effect of all of this. I'll disable the cloner again. I'll select my front face, and so I can do something like an inset, like this, and then drag that face out a bit, and also delete the font tag so it has these hard edges. So now if I activate the cloner again, go into my camera, again, completely different look. So you can create some really interesting variations like very quickly with this. And because of the shadows and the ambient occlusion, this is quickly gonna become quite interesting, I think. This might be a bit too much of extrusion actually, like of going out, because of we don't have so much possibility of like using the depth, because we're working on a planar surface with the mapping. But you know, you can just play around with the stuff and see what works best. So now all of this is rendered, we can head into After Effects, and I want to import my image sequences into After Effects here, create a new composition from the selection for each of those, and this will just create a new comp. And I also just want to clean this up here, put these into a source folder, and then I'll always create like a 0 comps folder to have that at the top, and drag this in there. And so now this is looking good. I can also see that I have my alpha channels here. Just check that for the other one as well. Also have it here, that's good. And so now I can render these. And to render for Resolume, you always want to use the DXV codec. So once you install Resolume, it comes with this DXV3 codec. And this is just the most efficient codec for Resolume because it runs on the graphics card. So if you render anything for Resolume, always be sure to use this codec. So I'm going to drag that into here, and then in the output module, select the DXV3 codec for the format. And then in the channels here, we can see that we're rendering with the alpha channel, which is great. For some reason, it didn't apply it to the second one. After Effects is having some really weird issues recently. Also, the file naming is quite tedious because I always have to create it for every individual clip. It doesn't work as a batch for some reason. And yeah, now I can export my files for Resolume. So now let's have a look at how those actually look like on our mapping. So this is the first clip where we use the slices as a whole. Kind of interesting, also would work nicely as a mask, so I can set this above some other layer, like I can just import the tunnel lines, for instance, here. I'm just going to drag them here. And now you can see that if I make this a bit smaller and increase the line width, that this is now playing behind these slices. So this is also kind of a neat effect of the slices opening up and showing what's behind, kind of. And then the other one was this one. And I actually had some skepticism about the cubes moving too far from the original surface, but I think it doesn't work too bad actually. So yeah, this is also quite neat. Here's also some other variations that I played around with in Cinema. So we have a variation of this clip, and then we have this black and white solid thing where I applied a delay RGB. So even like very simple basic stuff like this, but just working with the original ratio and the correct scaling, it just adds this level of detail that is quite nice, you know. Same with this one. Then I also have this field, Mograph field here, that is this spherical field changing the rotation. Then we have this one. And just some more of these Mograph rotating effects. I think this one also works quite well because it's just this very texture that goes over the whole object. As well as this one. I think this one looks pretty good as well. And all of these clips are included in the preset pack that you can get on my web store. So that's how you can create some content for this paper mapping setup. And I hope that you got some inspiration from this, not only to recreate this step by step, but also to apply this to like your own ideas and your own project. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, leave a like and subscribe if you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.